To begin with, in thinking about this review and the ethics of machine learning in children's social care, well, who are we? I'm Dr. Ellie Ott from the Rees Center. The Rees Center was established in 2012 at the Department of Education at the University of Oxford. And what we aim to do is to use and produce research evidence to improve policy and practice in the area of children's social care and education, to aim to improve the life chances of those who are or have been supported by children's social care. And this research from the Rees Center has been led by our director, Dr. Lisa Holmes, who is unable to make it today, with the help of myself. And we were very pleased to partner with the Alan Turing Institute, who led on this project. And the Alan Turing Institute is the National Institute for Data Science and Artificial Intelligence. So they aim to ensure that data science and artificial intelligence improves the world for as many people as possible. And at the public policy program, they solve public policy challenges with the ethical and responsible data science. So it's been a pleasure to work with Dr. David Leslie, an ethics fellow here, as well as Kristina Hitrova, a research assistant in digital ethics. So really, both of our work kind of brings together what is central here, thinking about data, thinking about the ethics, thinking about why are we here, because we want to improve people's lives. So we were tasked, as Michael said, by the What Works for Children's Social Care. And this very difficult question, which I'm sure David will talk more about, but thinking about, is it ethical to use machine learning approaches in children's social care? And if so, how and under what circumstances? So when we were thinking about it, when we were going through it, we really ended up breaking it down to three questions, three areas. First of all, thinking about, should we be doing this? Thinking broadly in terms of the system, should we be doing machine learning in children's social care? And then thinking secondly, taking that question separately, can we do this right? What is the ethics of machine learning with this data in this context? And then finally, what is to be done? So kind of looking forward and towards recommendations. So you have the executive summary here with you all today, and the full report really goes into details with these three questions. And I'd encourage you all to read that full report because it is a question with such complexities. So how did we go about this research project? There were three components. The first of which was a desk-based review of the literature in this area. Then we had a consultation, a roundtable discussion with 31 individuals from a broad range of backgrounds and representing a broad range of organizations, civil societies, those who've been commissioned to do machine learning, kind of more companies, local authorities, researchers, academics. And then lastly, we had a family engagement workshop with some of those who have had lived experience of the children's social care system. I think what you'll see from the recommendations and what we've been talking about is that workshop in particular really informed a lot of our recommendations and informed the thinking. So all of these three things together are incorporated in our findings in the report. And then looking towards the bigger picture, looking towards the context of this report, we need to acknowledge that local authorities are already using predictive analytics and machine learning in terms of both internal analyses and commissioning external companies. And so we need to think about the transparency of the approaches, the underpinning principles, and the approach to ethics. So this is really, I think, a key time to consider the ethics of machine learning in children's social care. And with that, I'll hand over to David to talk about our findings.
Hi, everybody. So we're thrilled to have this group with us, and I just would like to initially say sort of thank you for, I see people who participated in our family engagement workshop here, those who participated in the stakeholder roundtable. So thank you for coming. I really appreciate the participation. We really did listen to the sort of engagements that we did, and it really shaped the research that we undertook. And I would say, starting from this question, should we be doing this? Just generally speaking, the conversation that we had at our initial stakeholder roundtable was really organized into kind of two parts, right? There was in the conversation questions that were of an external nature, so that's questions that stepped out of the actual boots on the ground practice of designing and implementing machine learning, and asked the question, should we be doing this? Is it, from an outsider point of view, is it even justified? Is it justifiable to be using this type of applied data science in this sort of sensitive domain? And so that question really sort of shaped the first kind of half of the review. And then the second question, can we do this right, was a question about actually, if provided that we do sort of assume that we can legitimately use machine learning, how do we then sort of come up with an account of the best practices that are involved in doing it right and carrying out responsible innovation in this area? And so that initial conversation really did shape the way we organized this whole review. So first question we sort of broached in the review was, what does ethical machine learning or ethics as it's applied in machine learning in children's social care require? And for this, we did a kind of broader landscape review where we focused on 19 sets of ethical standards from social work and AI, and found that they did have a lot in common. So first of all, they have common origins. The ethics of social work largely draws upon the tradition of bioethics and the tradition of human rights discourse. And we really did find that in general, this was something that they have in common with AI and machine learning ethics. We've done a kind of broader review of the sort of 36 or so major AI ethics frameworks, and there is this kind of commonality where we do have questions of thinking about human rights and bioethics in both of the sort of frameworks. So we zoomed in on 8 of the major ethics codes in social work in the UK and beyond, and then we attempted to integrate those with the prominent AI ethics frameworks. And you'll see that we actually carry out a kind of side-by-side reconstruction of how to integrate the sort of landscape of AI ethics with the landscape of social work ethics. And so to bring them together, we organized our research into 3 levels of the frameworks. There's the ethical values that set the direction of responsible machine learning innovation in children's social care. So this idea that the ethical values are steering or guiding the practices from the start. We then went through practical principles that establish justifiability of design and deployment. So that would be the kind of codes of conduct and the various guardrails that would be set up in establishing best practices in using machine learning in children's social care. And we also sort of provided a bigger sort of picture of some professional virtues for professional integrity or use, integrity and use of machine learning. And those 3 kind of tiers organize the kind of integration of the two bodies of ethics frameworks. And so the other bit that we started with when we started at that first tier of ethical values was really thinking deeply about the risks of using machine learning in children's social care. And as you can see on the left, we kind of, or I'm sorry, yes, your left. We started with sort of 3 main kind of problem areas in the world. The first, this risk of losing interpersonal or interhuman connection, autonomy, and empathy. So, there's a potentially depersonalizing or desocializing effect of integrating automation in the social care domain. And it potentially really affects the relationships of frontline care workers to families and children in the kind of social care environment, and potentially will potentially reduce the role of interpersonal communication, empathy or empathetic understanding, and individual empowerment. And so that kind of first issue was then kind of then informed the ethical concerns of human agency and social interaction. Poor quality outcomes was the second kind of real concrete problem that we thought about. Here we talk about in data science garbage in, garbage out. So the question is, does the quality of data available, does that sort of dictate the sort of sufficient level for having good quality outcomes? Poor data quality will yield poor quality outcomes, garbage in, garbage out. And so in the ethics side of it, in the ethical concerns, this has to do with well-being and the public benefit, right? Is if we don't use good enough data and it's not producing good outcomes, we are not serving the well-being of those who are affected in the public benefit. Finally, the last kind of concrete problem that we started from was bias and discrimination. So, there's a sense in which the use of predictive risk modeling can in fact reinforce or augment the social dynamics of bias and discrimination. And we really, really need to think about this when we think about what we're doing with applied data science, because in a sense, the insights that are drawn from existing distributions of data in supervised learning models, which is the sort of prominent type of model used, when they work reliably, they are accurate in out-of-sample prediction by replicating the existing social patterns. And if those existing social patterns contain bias, discrimination, inequality, then there's this risk really that the use of these systems, when they're effective, will just sort of reproduce and replicate the bias and discrimination, and take into account even there that when we think about that replication, that largely those who are using social services in this area and that are being measured in this area are those who are overrepresentative of a group that is disadvantaged. And so when you think about the future data sets, then there's a feed forward where that might actually operate to create greater forms of bias. And so we started with this kind of third concern then on the ethics side of social justice and equity. So the values that we presented deriving from these kind of levels are basically four. Starting with the agency and then moving down. So respect the dignity of individuals, empower them and value their unique contexts and life plans. Connect sincerely, openly, and inclusively to prioritize trust, solidarity, and collaboration. Care for each other's well-being and serve with empathy, selflessness, and compassion. Protect social justice and public interest by ensuring equity, recognizing diversity, and challenging discrimination and oppression. And so these were all drawn from the existing literatures in social work ethics and AI ethics, but they in fact hit the nail on the head when it comes to some of the concrete needs that we have when we think of the bigger empirical problem. The practical principles, the principles of good conduct that we drew out also in the integration, we put them into three categories. First, fair, sustainable, and ever-improving social care. So for this category, we thought about the use of ML, machine learning in children's social care, should ensure that outcomes are fair, equitable, and do not harm through bias or discrimination. And they should ensure that the impacts on affected individuals and communities are thoroughly taken into account. And they should ensure that the use of machine learning in children's social care supports the improvement of the care environment. So fairness, non-discrimination, and improvement. The second sort of group that we identified in the two literatures is that social care should support and empower those who use it and those who are affected by it. So the use of machine learning should support clear and understandable decisions, right? They should support the decision makers. They should support the frontline workers to have impartial, evidence-based, and self-aware professional judgments. So they should be sufficiently interpretable. And in supporting the judgments and the thoughts of the social workers, these systems should also, in the way they're trained in their usage, should also accommodate a social worker's judgment of looking at the concrete individual context of the impacted family and the individual. Statistical generalization is just that. It doesn't take into account the life context, the life circumstance of the individual. And so when we think about social care that supports and empowers, that dimension of really thinking about the individual affected should be incorporated into the system. Finally, we sort of classified a third group in the practical principles, which was transparent, responsible, and accountable social care. So this is what it is. We need transparency in the conduct here. We don't have yet adequate levels of transparency in the design and implementation workflow. We don't have adequate levels of accountability in terms of the capacity to audit the systems. And this is a priority when we really think about the practical ethics or the code of conduct that might govern the use of machine learning in children's social care. So I'm not going to go into the list of professional virtues, but this is kind of a compendium or a gathering of some of the main elements of professional character that are suggested in both social work and in AI ethics and machine learning. So what we did then was ask how these ethical values that I've just presented to you, which would lie behind the responsible use of machine learning in social care, then might provide a kind of critical yardstick, a kind of set of criteria against which we could then examine empirical factors and question of whether or not the empirical factors actually met those ethical criteria. And so the report then moves to three sort of main empirical areas that we really think deserve deep reflection when we question the use of machine learning in this area. The first is the context of public management in the circumstances of austerity. And so, you know, we in both the stakeholder roundtable and in the family engagement, austerity came up, and the reason it did come up, I think, is because there is a sense in which the legacies of administrative automation pose challenges to the interpersonal and relational character of social work as such. So do automated systems that sort of advance the exercise of administrative power in the ends of increased efficiency, in the ends of cost savings, do they displace these values of respecting human agency, supporting interpersonal connection, sustaining well-being through care, and taking care of the vulnerable vis-a-vis the way we look at social justice? And if they do, we need to take pause when thinking about using machine learning in the social care environment. And I would say it's a significant point of reflection to really think deeply about that, because the nature of social care from our engagements and from our literature review really does demand that the human factor, the relational factor, be prioritized when we think about how the use of machine learning plays out. The second context that we wanted to bring up as a result of this kind of ethics, holding the ethical criteria against existing circumstance, was what we call system, organization, and participant readiness. And readiness was something that was brought up in our family engagement, and it's extremely significant. So the success of responsible machine learning innovation will require the investment of significant resources, mission ownership in organizations and at the system level, supportive and cooperative infrastructures, cultural receptivity, cognitive preparedness. All of these components are, we might say, preconditions of the success of responsible innovation. And so the question is, are we ready to do this correctly? Are we ready to do this in a justifiable way? And what we sort of moved towards in the report was to say, well, we need to take a more ecological point of view, and we need to look at the barriers and enablers of responsible innovation intervention from this kind of point of view of systemic, organizational, and psychological or cognitive preconditions of the success of the innovation. And this, I think, there's not much research on this yet in terms of using machine learning in this area, but this is definitely an area that we need to focus on in the future. And then the final empirical factor that we thought about was the issue of social inequality and cycles of poverty and discrimination. And this is something that I mentioned before, which is just we really need to think about whether or not this particular application of data science in predictive risk assessment is going to sort of reproduce patterns of social inequity. I mean, this is a deep concern and a deep question, and one of the moments of reflection that we ask for is to think about how the energies of data science can be used effectively. Is it the most effective use of the energies of data science to do to engage in activities that might perpetuate relations of inequality? It's a question that I think should really be thought deeply about, and it's one I think that in the course of the review, we suggest it might mean that we redirect some of our attention to actually thinking about the causal factors behind the inequality, behind those conditions that are creating the need for these social care interventions. And data science has a lot of descriptive and diagnostic tools to help us understand these conditions. And it's something that we might think deeply about. Can the energies be directed in that other way? So once we sort of went through this, then we go to the second question. Assuming that we can justify the use, then we can. My assistant Christina is giving me the. I'm going far too long. I'll try to be quick for the rest of it. So then we move on to can we do this right, which is this question about the actual sort of best practices in using machine learning. We go through basically the machine learning life cycle and hold some of the existing practices against these various standards. So we start with issues of data representativeness, relevancy, recency, and the measurement accuracy, and ask if existing practices are actually living up to the needs of responsible innovation. Then we go through the model design process, problem formulation, pre-processing, model building, and issues of interpretability. And finally, we go into issues of implementation, and which involve user interface, training, and procedures. And I'll leave you to read the 74-page report on this, but we do go through each one of these and examine how best practices are held against the existing, what we know of the existing practices based upon our literature review. Okay, so the few questions that guided this part. Do we have data of sufficient high quality to provide a holistic picture of families, right? This is the data quality issue. How do we reliably measure success of children's social care service? I've been to a lot of events where this is really the issue. How do we define the problem? How do we define the success at that very initial moment of designing the systems? Can we ensure the justifiability of designer use and decisions at every step of the design process and implementation? And do we have the resources necessary for the responsible development, use, and maintenance of the systems? And so let me quickly run through then our 8 recommendations before I get the hook. So out of the sort of the family engagement, it became clear to us and also based upon the review that it's mandating the responsible design and use of machine learning models in this area at the national level is a priority. Our families stressed the need for nationally mandated public standards to guide ethical design and deployment of machine learning. And this makes sense, right? I mean, there's such a variability between local authorities. The need for having standards that set ethical practice across was considered to be quite important. Second recommendation was that we should connect practitioners and data scientists across local authorities to improve machine learning innovation and to advance shared insight in applied data science through openness and communication. So there's a current siloing of research and innovation practices. Thank you, Michael. I got a note that it's okay not to rush. You're the man. Okay. So there's a current siloing of research and innovation practices that's stifling progress. We simply need to be better in the public sector about connecting local authorities to each other. There's a lot of extremely smart civil servants and local authority members, data scientists, who are doing really good work. There's just no kind of bridging factor right now to bring the work together. At the Turing Institute, now I'm going to go into anecdotes because you gave me more time. At the Turing Institute, we really try to engage the local authorities, and I can tell you those who we workshop ethics frameworks with, these are some of the sharpest data scientists around and really care about this stuff. And so connecting them will only lift the possibilities of doing this stuff right. Okay, the third recommendation was institutionalize inclusive and consent-based practices for designing, procuring, and implementing machine learning models. So families emphasize the importance of consent and deliberative involvement at all points across the machine learning life cycle, and suggested local authorities should listen. Now, I should also point out that in organizational theory and implementation science, which is where we drew the stuff about readiness, this is a central element in that literature about successful responsible innovation intervention, right? So this idea that when you have co-creation that goes across stakeholder groups, so families involved at every point in defining the ends of the system, in thinking about how choices are made at certain pressure points in the process, the innovations will simply have better uptake, and they will be integrated into the various organizational and community levels and family levels in a more effective way. And that's an extremely important point that we haven't yet, I believe in this area, we haven't yet really even broached that. The fourth recommendation is that we fund, initiate, and undertake active research programs in system organization and participant readiness. So there's a need for much empirical resource to be done to identify and better understand the barriers and enablers of effective integration of responsible machine learning innovation in children's social care settings. It simply doesn't exist yet, and it needs to exist because if we are going to engage in this type of applied data science, we need to be ready for it at all levels, at the systems level, at the organization level, and at the participant level, so at the level of the users and those who are affected by the use. The fifth, I think, recommendation I'm on now is understand the use of data in children's social care better, so that recognition of its potential benefits and limitations can more effectively guide machine learning innovation and innovation practices. So we have to better understand how data has been used in the field and to what degrees of success or failure. And this will indeed help manage wider expectations about what is possible in the use of machine learning in children's social care. The gaps of knowledge are significant and troubling, I would say, as they exist. We really need to be deliberate about understanding the data that exists in local authorities, how the data is being linked, is the data accurately being measured, is it recent? I mean, there's a whole set of understandings that we don't yet have. And it's really important that we kind of gain a better grasp on that in order to move forward in a responsible way. I think I'm on the sixth recommendation. Use data insights to describe, diagnose, and analyze root causes of the need for children's social care and experiment to address them. So this is what I was mentioning before, that we do want to direct data science to understand, diagnose, and address the root causes behind the deeper social structural problems and dynamics that generate the expanding needs for children's social care. And it really might be something to think about, that we can use better knowledge to design better policies and better interventions. Descriptive and diagnostic applications in data science can provide insights that can shape policy that directs our attentions to addressing root causes. And it's just something that, forward-looking, we should think about as one of our recommendations. The seventh recommendation is to focus on individual and family advancing outcomes, strength-based approaches, and community-guided prospect modeling. So a lot of research is needed to explore how positive outcomes can be integrated into data analytics in children's social care. So right now we have a focus on risk and potential negative outcomes. One of the things that we recommend, and I think it's another forward-looking recommendation, is that we think about holistic definition of outcomes, family-based definition of outcomes. How can we use these positive definitions of outcome to enhance the development of children? And how can we use them to enhance the autonomy and integrity of families? And work on this is already starting to be done. Just this past month, colleagues in New Zealand released a paper on strength-based approaches to thinking through data analytics in this space. And so we need better longitudinal data, they concluded, for this. And this doesn't yet exist, but it's something we should be moving towards. Finally, last recommendation, improve data quality and understanding through professional development and training. And this is related to the readiness issue too. So data collection analysis and use of the models should be built into social care and social work training. Focus should be on accurate and impartial data collection and the use of machine learning in line with ethical values. And I would just point out here that training on the implementation side is so important, not simply because we need to ready users to not over-rely or over-comply with automated outputs. We need to prepare a kind of more ethical approach to reflection in using the systems, right? There is a need for cognitive upskilling, and to use a term which I probably wouldn't, if it didn't come into mind right now, but there's a need for moral upskilling, which is to say we need to upskill the way we reflectively approach the best practices in implementing these systems. Okay, that's all I have. Claudia.